right, we are ready to go. Then we'll get this started. Infrastructure concepts and considerations. What is the main advantage of cloud infrastructure over on-premises? Full control over hardware, lower network speed, no need for physical hardware management, or unlimited mean time to repair. Excellent. What is a potential drawback of centralized management consoles? Increased network segmentation, single point of failure, reduces visibility, or harder to monitor logs. It's a valid guess, but yeah, it's all in one place, so that creates a single point of failure there. How does containerization differ from virtualization? It's less efficient than virtualization, uses multiple OS instances, requires a hypervisor, or runs isolated application in a single host OS. Brilliant, guys. Why can IoT devices pose a security risk? One compromised device can threaten the entire network. They always slow down the network. They only work to embed with embedded systems where they are immune to patches. I remember with this one, the Target HVAC system attack, where they broke in through insecure HVAC systems and were able to get to the POS systems because of the lack of segmentation. What is a characteristic of SCADA/ICS systems? They use containers instead of hypervisors, fully connected to the internet for monitor. They do not require isolation. They're highly segmented for security. That's what I know that. Send the link again if you want to join. We're only a handful of questions in. Excellent. What does RTOS ensure in real-time systems? Critical processes always get CPU priority. The storage is prioritized, reduced uptime, faster patch management. Awesome, guys. You guys are killing it. What is the trade-off when designing for high availability? Fewer servers needed, increased costs for improved uptime, reduced power requirements, or lower uptime but lower costs. Excellent. Halfway. What does MTTR stand for in infrastructure considerations? Maximum time to repair, mean time to repair, minimal technical recovery, or mean time to recover. Yeah, you guys are going to hear this one a lot. Mean time to repair. Which of the following is not typically included in total cost of ownership? Installation, maintenance, uptime metrics, or depreciation? Yeah, that one's a tough one. Uptime metrics, though, not it. We got right at. Here we go. What allows applications to automatically expand and contract resources based on demand? Change control, high availability, SCADA systems, or elasticity? Yeah, remember, elasticity allows it to expand and contract. Very stretchy scenarios. You manage a cloud-based web app that must stay online even during server failures. Which strategy would help? Single server deployment, skip patching for speed, high availability with redundant systems, or only on-premises servers? Excellent, guys. Anything to keep the servers running. New IT sensor is added to your factory network, which is the most important consideration. Isolate it and monitor it for unusual behavior. Make it a primary controller. Connect it directly to the internet, or ignore updates to avoid downtime. Yeah, you want to make sure when you have a new IoT sensor that you make sure it's good to go because they are not built for security. The company experiences frequent downtime due to misconfigured cloud deployments. What process could reduce errors? SCADA segmentation, chain control and orchestration, MTTR tracking, or patch management? Patch management is a very valid guess, but I want to orchestrate and have change controls to ensure everything stays up to standards. A critical embedded system cannot be patched frequently. What is the best practice? Increase MTTR, switch it to cloud hosting, apply additional compensating controls, accept its vulnerabilities. Switch to cloud hosting is another valid guess, but you want to apply compensating controls. And you'll hear that one a lot, especially with legacy systems or things like this, ones where you can't really mess with it very much. Last one. After a ransomware attack, your team relies on insurance to recover financial losses. What does this represent? Risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk duplication, risk transfer. Awesome, guys. It does seem like it would be risk avoidance, but you're transferring that risk onto the insurance company. Excellent job, guys. Let's see that podium before we move on to our videos today. That score would have been higher had you been here for the first handful of them. You guys all did fantastic. Yeah. All right. And with that,
So it's risk transfer.
say it one more time.
Oh, sorry, I just said. So the last one was risk transfer.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Okay.
transferring the risk onto the insurance company.
Okay. Yeah, because I was the one who guessed wrong.
I get that. Some of those are, I like the infrastructure concept and consideration stuff and GRC. Some of the more like, yeah, stuff like that is where I usually struggle the most too.
Right, and that makes sense.
You get so many different terms that all sound similar and acronyms that are all very similar. It's just, it can be a lot. So you guys all did a fantastic job. I posted last week the link to this video. Did anyone have the chance to check it out, or do you guys want to watch this today? It's only 5 minutes.
Sure. Why not? Can watch.
Okay, cool. All right, so we will do this and finish up our infrastructure stuff and move on to the network topics. Please let me know if you guys need me to pause it or anything. I think Kevin's around.
I've worked on hundreds of different networks in my career, and everyone's network tends to have unique characteristics. This makes sense because if you're working in a manufacturing environment, your network infrastructure is going to be very different than if you're working in a medical environment. But even with these dramatic differences between the overall goals of the organization, there are still parts of the network that are very similar from one network to another. We tend to use firewalls to help us segment the network and determine where we might place different devices in our network infrastructure. This can help us keep the attackers on the outside of our network while allowing legitimate traffic to pass through. But of course, the firewall is not the only security technology we might use. There are other devices that either include their own security or can help with the overall security architecture. Devices such as honeypots, jump servers, sensors on the network, and load balancers can help create a more secure computing environment. One characteristic that can help in the process of designing a secure environment is the idea of a security zone. A security zone is very different than an IP address range or subnet description. Instead, a security zone allows us to logically separate all of the devices on our network by their use or their access type. Each section of the network would be assigned a zone. For example, you might create a very basic network design where part of the network can be accessed from the outside and part of the network is prohibited from outside access. You might assign one of those zones as a trusted zone and the other as the untrusted zone. By themselves, those names don't tell us a lot about what those zones do. Some organizations refer to these as an internal zone and an external zone. And if you wanted to expand on those descriptions to provide more granular security, you can have many different zones, some that might be called inside, internet, servers, databases, or screened. This makes it easier for us to understand what the security rule is based upon, and it makes it easier to maintain these rules in a very large rule base. For example, we might have a rule that says we are allowed to send data from a trusted zone to an untrusted zone. Or you might allow access from the outside, the untrusted part of the network, to a screened zone, which is where our screened subnet might be. Or in certain circumstances, there may be untrusted traffic that is allowed to move onto the trusted network. Here's how we might put these into practice. This is a network that has an internet connection on the outside. There's a firewall, and then there's a router that connects to the rest of the internal network, which includes mail servers, database servers, directory servers, and other internal devices. A very simple zone configuration then might be everything on the outside and everything on the inside. We might call one of those zones the untrusted zone, where the internet is, and then we would have the inside, which is the trusted zone. Here's a similar design where we're using an internet zone, a screened zone, and an inside zone. And you can see that we have more granularity when we start breaking these up into smaller zones and can set more precise security rules in all of our firewalls. An attacker is going to work very hard to find any opening that might be on your network. And for that reason, we should think about how would an attacker get into our network. If this was our house, they could get in through a door, a window, or perhaps the basement. In our network, they could get in through application code, an open port that might be in a server, the authentication process itself, or simply human error. We could work very hard to make sure that we patched all of our applications and we've closed any open ports that are unnecessary on our servers. But if we've got one firewall rule that we've accidentally configured improperly, that human error could result in someone gaining access to our network. We refer to this combination of potential openings of our network as the attack surface, and our goal is to minimize the size of the possible attack surface. For example, we may want to audit any code that we're putting into our network. We might want to specifically block certain ports on our firewall, and we'll always be monitoring traffic in real time to get an idea of who's entering our network and what applications are being used. And of course, part of that attack surface is the connectivity that we build throughout our network. Of course, every device on our network tends to be connected in some way to every other device. So it's important that we integrate security into the network connectivity as well. One thing that we can do is secure the network cabling that we have in our facility. In many organizations, the cabling is simply sitting out. There are both physical and logical protections that we can apply to the network drops that are next to our desks and our conference rooms. And we might also want to consider protecting the cabling as it goes between different parts of the building. If someone is able to tap into the network, they can watch all of the traffic traversing between devices. For that reason, it's always a good idea to provide application-level encryption, so even if they are able to capture the actual packets, they have no idea what's contained inside of those packets. For our remote sites and people connecting from off-site, we may want to include additional encryption for those links. It's not unusual to build IPsec tunnels from site to site or to have a VPN concentrator so that anyone on the outside can securely connect to the corporate office.
All right, how did everyone feel about that one? Pretty straightforward.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yep, it's good.
Awesome. All right, well, with that then, we will move into intrusion protection. It's another short video. Got a lot of short ones today. So, once again, let me know if you guys have any questions or need me to stop for any reason.
An intrusion prevention system, or IPS, is designed to watch traffic traverse the network in real time. If there's anything inside the traffic that could be interpreted as dangerous or an exploit, it can be blocked immediately by the IPS. This might be a known vulnerability, such as an exploit against an operating system or a known vulnerability in an application, or it might be something more generic, like a buffer overflow or a SQL injection. You might also see a reference to an intrusion detection system, or an IDS, which is able to alert you that these vulnerabilities are traversing your network, but an IDS can't block any of that traffic. That's why we have intrusion prevention systems, so that you can prevent that information from getting into your network if it's identified. One of the challenges with security devices that sit in line to monitor traffic going by is that those devices can occasionally fail. They might lose power, there might be a hardware problem, or it might be that there's a bug in the software and the system crashes. If this device is in line, what happens to your network traffic when that device fails? There are different scenarios depending on the engineering of that device. If this device has been configured as fail open, when there's a crash or it becomes unavailable, the data will continue to flow through that connection. Obviously, there will be no security processes occurring, but at least the network will remain up and running. If this is a fail closed system and the device crashes, not only will the security process no longer operate, but your network connection will be severed and there'll be no communication through that link. Obviously, most networks would probably prefer to have a fail-open system, but that's not always the case for every security device, so you'll need to check the documentation of what you're using to see whether it's fail-open or fail-closed. The need to have something that's fail-open or fail-closed is important when the device is inline and performing active monitoring. This is an example of an inline configuration. There is an internet connection, a firewall, there's a core switch, and between the firewall and the switch is an IPS that is put inline doing active monitoring. As traffic traverses this link between the core switch and the firewall, the IPS is examining all of the traffic, making a decision on whether the traffic is legitimate or potentially malicious, and then it can block that traffic in the IPS itself. Because an IPS is designed to block traffic in real time, an active monitoring configuration is often the default config. But there may be reasons that your organization is uncomfortable with an actively monitoring system. There may be a concern that an outage would cause downtime for the rest of the network, or they might be concerned that the IPS would be too aggressive with blocking traffic and would be blocking legitimate traffic instead of malicious traffic. In that case, the organization may feel more comfortable with a passive monitoring solution. With passive monitoring, devices can communicate to each other normally through a switch, and the switch is taking a copy of that traffic and sending it to the IPS. Since the IPS is not in line with the normal network communication between the devices and the switch, it can't cause any downtime to the network. But because it's not in line, it also has limited capabilities for blocking traffic. We often refer to this as an IDS design, even though we're using an IPS, because the IPS is not in line and it's not able to block traffic in real time. Here's a better view of this active monitoring configuration. We'll put some traffic on the network. This traffic will pass through the firewall. It will pass through the IPS where it will be evaluated. And if this traffic is legitimate and doesn't contain any vulnerabilities, it will pass on through to the core switch. The advantage of having active monitoring is that if traffic does come through the network and passes into the IPS can identify potential attacks and block them immediately. At this point, the traffic is simply removed from the network and it's never sent through to the core switch. A passive monitor requires that you have some type of method for receiving a copy of the traffic. This might be built into the switch and called a port mirror or a span. That refers to a switch port analyzer. Or you might use a physical network tap to break into a physical connection. With passive monitoring, any traffic sent into the switch will be duplicated. One copy will be sent on its way to the destination, and another copy will be sent to the IPS for evaluation. This happens with all traffic traversing the switch where a duplicate is made, the destination receives a copy of that traffic, and the IPS also receives a copy of that traffic. This is a great way to identify and alert on malicious traffic, but it obviously isn't stopping the traffic from getting to the destination device.
Yeah, the IDS and the IPS. I use this in a lot of, or at least a couple of projects.
You use them in your projects? That we said. I'm sorry, it cut out for a second.
Yeah. So I said I use an IDS for a few of my projects.
That's a great idea. Do you have any suggestions for a good IDS to use?
I never use an IDS, but even though technologies like Snort or Snort will both have like an IDS and IDS capability. But
yeah, I've done a little bit with Snort, and it just like I did a couple rooms, I think, on Try Hack Me, and it's one that I really need some extra practice with because it's really like I don't know, the command line tools are the ones I really need to practice some more with.
Yeah, it's just like implementing like rules in your IDS, like that could be rather just configuring them.
Yeah,
but to answer your question, I think a way you can practice using IDS solutions is simply just in a virtual machine like Ubuntu.
Yeah,
and just installing them on that, operating system, and then just running a Kali map scan to have it scan for its IP address.
yeah.
So that way you can pick it up through the IDS.
I've got a handful of VMs here. I've got
Well, I would
Ubuntu,
put
Windows, Remnux, and Bounty and Kali. But I only really use lately Ubuntu. I've been working on a Spunk project on there.
Right. But I would put both of those on a bridge network.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up.
No problem.
I'm definitely planning on doing a lot more projects here soon. Now that I'm going to be getting this out of the way. And I'm glad this could help Danielle with the difference between active and passive. It's a good one to know. So, any questions before we move on from the last video?
No.
All right. Well, here we go on to network appliances. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
If you're on the inside of a private or internal network, it's relatively easy to connect and manage devices that may be also on the inside of that network. But what if you need to manage these devices and you're on the outside of the network? In that case, you may be able to take advantage of a jump server. A jump server is a device on the inside of your network that is accessible from the outside. It's usually hardened and it has security associated with it to limit access to only those individuals who are authorized. This means that usually it's a two-step process. The external client would connect first to the jump server, and from the jump server, they might SSH to a web server to make changes to the configuration. From a security perspective, this jump server is an important device to be sure that it is properly hardened and properly secured. You would not want unauthorized access to the jump server from someone who is outside of your network, because then they could potentially gain access to the devices on the inside. Another useful network appliance is a proxy server. A proxy is designed to sit in the middle of a conversation between two devices and make requests on behalf of one of those users. This is commonly seen with users that might be on the inside of the network and they want to communicate with a device that's on the internet. Instead of communicating directly to those devices on the internet, your internal devices communicate to a proxy server, and the proxy server makes that request to the internet. The response is then sent back to the proxy server, which can then evaluate that response, confirm that the information in that response is not malicious, and then send a response down to the original requester.
The reason we exist is because you cannot stay ahead of all threats. So what we do is we block.
There are many different uses for a proxy. This could simply be for caching. So the first person who makes the request to the proxy server has all of that information cached inside, which means the second person making the same request can simply receive the same response as the first request. This saves a great deal of bandwidth and time because you're not sending those subsequent requests out to those devices on the internet. These proxies can also perform URL filtering, so they will limit what websites you're able to visit. Many proxies will also provide content scanning, so anything that's received by the proxy can be analyzed to see if there might be malicious traffic or some type of exploit, and if it is, it can be blocked at the proxy. You'll generally see two different types of proxies in use. One is a proxy that needs to be configured in the application or operating system that you're using. This type of proxy is referred to as an explicit proxy because you are explicitly naming the IP address or name of the proxy that you're communicating with. Another type of proxy is a transparent proxy. From the end user's perspective, they have no idea the proxy is even in place. The proxy is able to sit in the middle of the conversation and automatically make requests on a user's behalf without configuring anything else in the operating system. Since the users have no idea the proxy is in place, we refer to that as a transparent proxy. There are many different types of proxies you might use. A proxy you might use every day is a very simple proxy called a network address translation, which will convert between internal and external IP addresses on internet-facing routers. But the proxy type that many people think about is an application-level proxy. An application proxy understands the protocols used for a specific application. For example, you might be using an HTTP proxy. Some proxies can work with multiple protocols, so you might be able to proxy HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, and other protocols as well. If you're using a proxy inside of your network to control outbound traffic to the internet, then you're using a forward proxy. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as an internal proxy. With a forward proxy, your users make requests to an internal proxy server that is inside of your network. That proxy makes the requests out to the internet, to the website. The website replies back to the proxy, which then examines the traffic, and if everything looks legitimate, it will send the response down to the user. Reverse proxies provide a similar type of function, but for inbound traffic to a specific service. For example, there might be users on the internet that would like to communicate to a web server that's inside of your network. Instead of having the users communicate directly to the web server, they connect to a proxy server. The proxy server then makes requests on the user's behalf. Those responses are sent from the web server to the proxy server, which then sends that response to the user on the internet. This provides additional security in front of your web server. If there is any type of malicious traffic inbound, it can be dropped at the proxy rather than being sent to the web server. This proxy can also act as a caching server for identical requests coming from the internet. The first request from the internet would be handled by the proxy. It will be forwarded to the web server for its response. The response back to the proxy, though, is saved in a local cache. All subsequent identical requests from the internet are then sent, of course, to the proxy server, but instead of sending that request again to the web server, we simply pull from the cache and send the response directly from the proxy. This provides a much faster response time for the end users, and it limits the amount of load that's being sent to the web server. Another type of proxy you might find is an open proxy. From a security perspective, this is a significant concern because this is a proxy that is simply available for anyone on the internet to be able to use. These are commonly used to circumvent existing security controls. So instead of your device talking to a proxy or a firewall inside of your network, this information is sent directly to an external proxy, which then makes the request for you to another internet site. But there are significant security concerns when working with an open proxy. This proxy is managed by some third party, but we have no idea who that might be. And that third party could add additional information into these traffic flows that are going back and forth. The proxy owner could be adding advertisements into the messages being sent back and forth, or they might include malicious code that would infect the devices on your network. In many organizations, these open proxies are blocked to limit any type of security risk communicating through those unknown devices. Another useful network appliance is the load balancer. Load balancer does exactly what the name implies. It will take a load coming from one direction and distribute that load across multiple services. You often see load balancers used in large-scale implementations. You might have a group of web servers or a farm of database servers, and having a load balancer in place maintains efficiency and keeps the load even across all of those devices. Another nice feature of a load balancer is fault tolerance. If a server connected to a load balancer was to fail, the load balancer would recognize that server was no longer communicating and would split the load among the remaining servers. This convergence happens very quickly, and most users don't even realize that a change has been made to the load balancer. Many load balancers are running as an active load balancer, which means all of the servers connected to the load balancer are active and are all being used by the load balancer.
Atera's AI Copilot helps you solve complex IT issues faster than you can say,
This, of course, allows this single load balancer to manage the load across all of those individual servers. This load balancer can also provide TCP offloading, which means that it doesn't have to set up an individual TCP communication session for every user connecting to these servers. Instead, it will keep one single TCP connection open all the time and simply distribute the load without having to recreate separate TCP sessions each time. Some load balancers can also offload the SSL decryption process. Instead of having the servers manage the decryption individually, all the decryption can be done on the load balancer, which then sends in the clear or decrypted traffic down to the servers. On the way back, the load balancer will encrypt the response and send that back to the user. There's usually purpose-built hardware inside of the load balancer to provide efficient encryption and decryption processes. Just like a proxy, a load balancer can also provide caching, especially if there are multiple identical requests being made to the web servers. And there may be prioritization built into this as well, where certain applications or certain protocols may have a higher priority than others. And many load balancers can also provide content switching, which means they recognize the type of request being made and can send certain requests to specific web servers that are connected to the load balancer. Some load balancers can work in an active-passive configuration. This means that some of the servers are active and working when connected to the load balancer, but there are also other servers which are ready to work but are not currently being used by the load balancer. If any of the active servers fail, the load balancer recognizes that that server is no longer communicating and will begin sending those requests to the standby or passive web servers that are ready to go. In our example here, we have server A, server B, server C, and server D. And you can see that server A and B have a green light, so they are actively being used by the load balancer. And we have standby or passive web servers that are configured with these red notations. A user will make requests to the load balancer, and of course, the load balancer will distribute that load to any of the servers that may currently be working. However, if a server was to fail for any reason, the load balancer would recognize there was a failure, mark that device as being no longer available, and then use one of the passive or standby devices and turn that into an active device. Any subsequent requests to the load balancer would then be sent to the new active devices. Another useful series of network appliances commonly used for network management and monitoring are sensors and collectors. Some devices that you may already be using have sensors built into them. Things like switches, routers, firewalls, and other devices may have the ability to compile statistics and make them available to these collectors. There's also a great deal of information that can be gathered from intrusion prevention systems, authentication logs, web server access logs, and anything else that might be connected to the network. You can also use sensors that are designed as separate devices whose sole purpose is to collect statistics from the traffic going across the network. All of the details being collected by these sensors is sent to one central database called a collector. Sometimes this is a proprietary console that's written specifically to work with certain types of devices, for example, an IPS or a firewall, or you may be using something that is able to collect data from many different types of devices, such as a SIEM. This is a security information and event manager, and this not only provides a way to consolidate all of this data into a single database, but it also provides a powerful reporting tool to be able to consolidate, correlate, and compare different types of data across all of these very diverse devices. Here's an example of the console that you might find on a SIEM. This one is showing a report that describes different types of events that are occurring on the network, including failed authentications and port scans. You also see a log of security events at the top, and there are many options for other types of reports that you can find on the left sidebar.
All right, how do we feel about that one?
That was a lot of information.
Yeah, that one was pretty information heavy. We only have 8 minutes left. Do you guys want to do one more video, or was that a lot of information to take in? Because we can stop there if that's preferable. One more.
Guys.
I'm sorry, I couldn't. I didn't hear what you said.
Maybe we should do one more. If anybody else is up.
Yeah, Danielle also said one more. This one's just a 3-minute video, closer to 4, I guess. But don't feel like you need to know everything in these videos right away either. You'll. This is just a start. Once you get the hang of it, and once you're a little further, you can go back through and solidify any of the stuff that you're struggling with. This is just to make it so when you do hear it later, it at least solidifies it in your mind. So you're like, oh, hey, I know these words. So, all right. Well, with that being the case, we'll jump into our last video on port security. Please stop me if you need anything or have any questions.
One security challenge we have in many organizations is port security. This refers to the security on the individual interfaces that are on a switch or connections to a wireless access point. You may have even used port security without even knowing it. If you connect to a wired or wireless network and it first prompts you for a username and password, you may have taken advantage of this type of security. This is a very effective way to secure a wireless network because it provides authentication before anybody can access the resources on that wireless connection. But this is not limited to wireless networks. You can also implement port security on traditional switches. Behind the scenes, the protocol that allows this port security to operate is called EAP. This is the Extensible Authentication Protocol, and it's a framework for authentication that can be applied to many different types of networks and connections. This means if you're a wireless manufacturer, you can create an EAP configuration that works with your wireless access point. And if you create wired switches, you can enable EAP on that wired switch and integrate all of them together. The most common integration of EAP is with 802.1x. This is an IEEE standard that manages the authentication process for users and devices onto your network. Sometimes you'll hear 802.1x referred to as NAC, or Port-Based Network Access Control. If you were to plug into an available interface that's on a switch, you would not be able to access the network that's on that switch until you authenticated using 802.1x. EAP and 802.1x work together so that you can provide login credentials and then have those credentials provide you with access to the network. You'll often see these used in conjunction with other types of authentication protocols or databases such as Radius, LDAP, TACACS+, Kerberos, and others. This is usually a process that involves three separate components. One of the components is the end user or client. We refer to this device as the supplicant. There's also usually a switch or access point that you'd like to gain access to. We refer to this as the authenticator. There's also usually a backend database that contains all of these login credentials. This might be an existing Active Directory database that you can access with Kerberos or LDAP, or you might have a Radius or a TACACS database. We refer to this as the authentication server. When the supplicant first connects to the network, there's no authentication, and the authenticator will not allow any access to the network until the authentication is complete. Once the authenticator sees this initialization, it sends a message back to the supplicant asking for login credentials. We refer to this request from the authenticator as the EAP request. The supplicant provides an EAP response with the name of the device trying to access the network. That request is passed from the authenticator to the authentication server. And if the authentication server is accepting logins, it will send a request back to the authenticator asking for additional details that can be used for authentication. The authenticator sends a request for those additional details to the supplicant, and then the supplicant provides the credentials required to log into this network. The final step will be to confirm that these login credentials are correct. The authenticator then sends those credentials to the authentication server, and if the username and password and other login credentials match, the authentication replies with successful login and tells the authenticator to allow that user access to the network.
All right, short one, but I know it had a lot of information in it. I would just recommend watching these on your own. You can check out the transcript as well if it makes things easier for you, if you prefer to read them. Sometimes when I'm listening on my own, I also prefer to slow down the video a little bit so because he can talk a little fast through some of these things. But how does everyone feel about all of that today?
Very good.
Very good.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'll be posting a recording and links and notes and everything for you guys. And next week we'll do a Kahoot to go back over what we learned today. So feel free to comment on my post later today or reach out to me if you guys need anything or have any questions. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. Great job today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
No problem, guys. Have a good day.